Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Your Heart Magic. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. And today we are starting a new series called Archetypes of the Tarot. And we are going to be going through the different archetypes and the major arcana of the tarot deck and exploring what each of them means. Now, this is definitely archetypes with a twist. My focus for feeling inspired to do this was less about here's what you need to understand in order to work with the tarot. And it was more about using that because there's like such a rich history behind it. It was just using that as a way to explore what are some of the most various archetypes and or the most common archetypes, and how can we understand those and work with those energies in our life to feel more inspired, to have a better understanding of ourselves, and to maybe just understand the collective kind of history and narrative of some of these concepts and symbols that have been around for centuries and centuries. This is also going to be a topic that I do not weekly. It'll be every other week or every few weeks. I haven't quite decided yet, but today we are kicking it off with the Fool. And I called this podcast episode Faith of a Fool because that really sums up the quintessential journey of the archetype of the Fool in the tarot deck. It's really about this idea of making leaps of faith and beginning something with a sense of faith, and not always knowing exactly where we're going when we start something new, but having something inside of us, this hope and this beginner's optimism and a sense of adventure that says, I don't need to know where to go or where I'm going in order to start this experience and see where this adventure takes me. So we are talking about the Fool today. And before we fully dive into that, I wanted to just briefly touch base on what is an archetype? Many of us have heard of that word in some shape or form. And there's many definitions out there, but in the simplest form, an archetype is like the original, kind of the original symbol, the original example of something that everything else is modeled after. An archetype is some kind of recurrent symbol that has created this model or representation that other things seek to embody or to emulate. So an archetype of, we'll say the fairy godmother archetype. Now that didn't come from Cinderella. There are many, many, many examples in mythology and history and stories and narratives of the fairy godmother. But when I hear fairy godmother right now, my mind went to Cinderella. I just kind of pulled this out of thin air as an example. But and I think about the fairy godmother coming along and zapping Cinderella and bringing her wish to life, where she's able to be beautiful and go to the ball and go see the prince. And she moves her wand and just creates magic out of it. And that is a representation of what a fairy godmother is. And I have a feeling that if I were to trace that archetype back to history and actually do a study on the symbolism and the representation of that and look at what's the first fairy godmother references in mythology or history, that there would be some basis, some prototype for some kind of grandmother, godmother type woman who has these otherworldly magical powers and is able to, grant a mortal person, a normal person, something kind of extraordinary in order to help them achieve whatever their challenge or their quest or whatever it is. And our understanding of a fairy godmother, when I said that word, I'm assuming that everybody listening automatically probably thought of something. Maybe it was Cinderella, maybe it was something else. That's an example of an archetype. It is this idea, this symbol that the fairy godmother represents, kind of this magical being, this magical woman. She is good. She is on the side of the protagonist, of the individual. She's not a, negative influence. That's a different kind of archetype. She's not like the bad witch. She's like Glinda the good witch. And she has these abilities to kind of grant this person and make their wish or make their dreams happen or assist them on their journey in some shape or form. So archetypes are really kind of this interesting idea that somewhere along the way, there had to be an original prototype of these ideas. And as mythology and symbolism and stories and various cultures spins out, there becomes this richer tapestry woven of all these collections of stories that all point to the same kinds of patterns and themes and characteristics and whatever our archetype is. Archetypes, the way that I think about them is if you were to take every story ever written about fairy godmothers, and, these days technology is scary remarkable. Let's say we punched all of those into some AI or some great processor that kind of narrated all of those out and asked it to spit out a definition of, based on all of this collection of rich literature, what does this mean? What would come out would be this definition that was representative of not only the archetype and the original intention behind it, but sometimes archetypes take on a meaning and a life of their own as culture changes and grows, and our understanding of them grows. So what's fun about working with the archetypes in the tarot deck is the tarot's been around for a long time. And I didn't do my research on this before hopping on the podcast to give a little mini dissertation on when the tarot was first invented. It can be traced back to times in court and playing cards and things. Like if you actually look at the history of it, and it can be traced back to Europe. I think there's even ideas around that it might have been in other cultures before that in different forms. So it has a rich history if you ever want to fall down the rabbit hole of looking that up. But over the years, there has been a very interesting proliferation of various kinds of decks, and all of them will have their interpretation of what these cards are in the deck. And in the traditional tarot deck, it begins with the Fool. And the Fool is this representative of the kind of naive, optimistic, young person who decides to strike out on an adventure. And if you're not familiar with the tarot, the Fool's adventure is really meeting all these different characters along the way who all have some kind of lesson or something to teach him. And as he meets these characters, he goes through this journey of learning about these various aspects of life, these various experiences and various facets of the human journey. So the journey of the Fool is really a reflection in some ways of our journey as a human being. In some ways, we are all the Fool, and this experience of being a human is very much the Fool's journey, where we are running into all these interesting characters. We are having some interesting adventures and intriguing adventures. Some of them we like better than others. We often have choices to make, and hard choices. As we have these experiences, we often learn about the shadow side and the light side of an experience. Not anything is really all good or all bad, at least in our experience as humans. We experience the good qualities in something. We also can experience the challenges and the shadow side of things. And so when we are working with the cards and the tarot deck and the major arcana, every card has its light side and its good side, and then it also has a shadow side to it. when qualities aren't well integrated or they're not taken into the context of the whole. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of all of that. Like, what are the good qualities of the Fool? What might be the shadow qualities? How do we work with these things? And how do we understand this archetype in order to feel more empowered on our human journey? Just off the top of my head, I actually wrote down a list of how archetypes are helpful in day-to-day life. I love working with symbols. I love working with the tarot deck, different oracle cards. I love the angels. A lot of times, spiritually, our spiritual connection, we receive a lot of signs and symbols from the world around us. Numbers can be symbols. Animals can be symbols. We can see hearts. In the clouds, find heart rocks. A lot of times, if somebody's had a loved one passed, it is not uncommon for them to see like a heart cloud or see hearts everywhere, or find a stone that's shaped like a rock. And what does a heart mean? It means love. Most of us have a universal understanding that a heart is a symbol of the archetype of love. And when we see that symbol, and it intersects with our journey in a way that feels personal and meaningful, we feel that we have received some form of communication from our spiritual connection. And most often we have. If something feels meaningful, usually it is meaningful. So there are all these ways that understanding this rich language of symbols can enhance our lives. And as somebody who is a writer and a psychologist, I'm really creative. I love art. I'm just very interested in the idea of collective wisdom behind these archetypes and these symbols. And it's fascinating to me. And the first time that I was ever introduced to a tarot deck, some people say tarot. I think that is probably more the correct pronunciation. But I think a lot of times we bring it to an English tarot. So I tend to say it that way, but either one in my understanding is correct to say. But the first time that I was introduced to it, it was really a friend who knew somebody who did readings. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that sounds so cool. I was on my spiritual journey at the time and just really opening up to this idea that there's many ways that the universe can speak to us. And I was intrigued by this idea that cards and readings and sort of these mysteries around that might be able to help reveal something about my life. I definitely had a little bit of that mystical sense of it because I didn't know anything about it. And so it was sort of this idea of, oh my gosh, somebody can take these cards and know things about me that I don't know, and it was kind of very magical to me. And I think there's still some of those qualities in it. But as somebody who's worked with them for a long time now, I think the most accurate thing I can say is they reflect back experiences in our life, and the cards themselves reflect back meanings and ideas around what we might be experiencing. And it does seem like something alchemical and slightly magical happens that often, if we're doing a reading with an open heart and purity of intent, somehow the cards might tell us a story that deeply resonates with exactly what we're experiencing at that time. And that is what I began to find when I began to work with them. I was not able to connect with this person who could do these readings through this friend who told me about them. And I got impatient. And so one day I went into Metro Books in Anchorage, Alaska on Benson Boulevard. I don't know if it's there anymore, but it was at the time. And I walked around and I found I think they were in like the New Age section or something. And so I found these tarot cards, and they only had like 2 or 3 choices to choose from. They didn't have a big selection. And so I kind of looked at all the ones that were available, and one of them like just felt not good to me. It just did not feel like what I wanted to work with. I didn't get a good sense of energy off of it. And I was like, not that one. And this other one felt very light and it felt very bright. And it was, I think, the mythological tarot. It's all based on Greek myth. I knew nothing about any of this. I didn't even know what to choose. But I was like, well, I like Greek mythology. And, I like the pictures that I see on the box. And most importantly, it felt good in my hand when I held it. It felt good on an energetic level. And I remember going home that evening and kind of opening this up. I think I felt like a kid in a movie, like opening up the book to the never ending story. Like I was the little kid who's reading about, I think it's a Trehu, and his horse or whatever. And I was like tapping into something that was bigger than just myself. And isn't that what a collection of archetypes is? It's this history, this richness, this collective well of wisdom that is bigger than what I currently possessed in that moment. And I knew I was holding these keys that were going to help me maybe tap into something bigger. And I began to like flip through the deck. And I remember really well the card that really stood out to me. There were two of them in that particular deck as I went through them. And the first card was Temperance. And the way it was represented in that deck. And then the second card was the Star. And so those are the two that as I was going through, I kind of laid out and I was like, I don't know what these cards mean, but these pictures speak to me the most. And then I picked up the guidebook and I read about what they meant. And those are still two of my very favorite cards years later, no matter what deck I'm working with. And after that is when I began to read and I began to see that the more I studied it, the more the cards took on meaning. I soon felt really inspired to purchase other decks and ones that like really resonated with me even more than the original one that I got. And somewhere along the way, I started doing readings for other people. And they would be like, oh my gosh, it's like the cards just know somehow. I think the cards reflect back on the most basic level, universal truths that we can relate to no matter where we're at on the journey. We want to look at it at a very kind of mundane way. And somebody was a skeptic, that might be where they would stop and say, okay, I don't know if I believe the rest of it, but I can see where this would reflect back a universal truth and that I might relate to it. If you want to take it a little bit more transcendent, and why wouldn't we? I really think that when I'm working with them, sometimes I will really put the intention in and be like, I need guidance right now. And I'm having a hard time tapping into it and my own intuition. I'm really cloudy on this issue. So please help me have the cards that most speak to this situation. And I have really developed a practice over the years where there are so many things that working with different kinds of cards has helped me tap into guidance and wisdom and resonance and really clear the cobwebs and the pollution, I guess, when I can't get out of the way of myself and just hear the truth and really get to the heart of the matter. So I love, love, love this as a practice. I'm super happy to be talking about it today. But just a few ideas that on how archetypes can help us is one, they help us tap into unactualized aspects of ourself. I often will think about if I need to do something that is a little bit outside, it's a little bit of a stretch for me. I don't love having to confront somebody or make a phone call or certain things I can do no problem on, like if I'm exercising in a professional capacity, but maybe something's really challenging for me. And like on here, I shared a little while ago about how we had to go into court for this silly leash citation where our dog was off leash during a horrible dog attack that could have been deadly to us. And we ended up getting slapped with a leash citation, from this vengeful hunter who reported us after we reported the fact that his dogs attacked us and our dog. And so we had to go into court that day. And I had to tap into the archetype of justice. I actually pulled the Justice Tarot card when we had the citation in hand. And I did a card reading for the citation. And that was the card that came out. It was justice. And that card is about balance and equity and the right thing happening. And for about a month before we had to go into court, I just had this like written citation laying on my desk with this card justice on it, and like a crystal by it that a wonderful friend had given me. And I just like was like, I'm just putting that energy into that day. And when we went into court, that was my prayer: just let justice happen. It did. If anybody paid or would listen to that podcast and you don't know the ending of that story, we didn't even have to talk to the judge. We were on a list of cases that were dismissed with prejudice or without prejudice. And so we were in and out of the courthouse in like 10 minutes. And it was about as fair as you can get outside of having to go in the first place. So I channeled, we'll say, the archetype of justice for that situation. And that really helped me find a sense of inner peace and a sense of strength and a sense of kind of tapping into a greater belief that the universe would help right what felt like a real wrong that was done to us. They can help us better understand the nature of the relationships in our life. It is helpful to sometimes understand archetypes, whether it's the tarot or astrological archetypes, not in a way to pigeonhole or put people in a box, but it can be very helpful to say something like, oh, they have a lot of like Capricorn Emperor energy. They are a very organized person. They really like structure. Sometimes those things, and having a sense of different personality types. And that's another way to think about tarot and archetypes, like personality test. And each of these archetypes is kind of the equivalent of some of the personality types that are out there. A lot of people are super, super into those things, whether it's a psychological test like the Myers-Briggs, or whether it's more like the human design stuff. And some of those, we're just really fascinated by them because it's really interesting to think that there are these sort of collective umbrellas of types of people and personalities that we fall under, and maybe the people in our lives fall under. And if we can better understand that, maybe we can better understand them. Understanding archetypes helps us develop a vocabulary that is richer with symbols and collective concepts. When I opened my first tarot deck that day, I was really stepping into a deeper world of signs, of symbols, of languages. Over the years, as I said, I've gotten a lot of different decks. I have a really fun book that I found at this like used library called Tidal Wave Books in Anchorage years ago. And it's about the tarot. And I don't have it in front of me. I just tell you who wrote it. I'll bring it out sometime. I don't even know if it's available anymore, but it's got like this history of the cards and like all these connections to different religious texts, to the Kabbalah, to numerology, to all these things I've never read or found anywhere else. And, so all of that is the language of signs and symbols. It's like the archaeology of soul and the archaeology of some of these spiritual symbols that many of us have lost touch with. And this can help us grow that. Understanding the archetypes helps us be more effective at working with the tarot if you choose to do so, and that feels right for you. And I think that it also can help us understand the various phases on our own life journey. In my writing, it's interesting throughout the years when I look at poems I've written and books I've written and essays I've written, the cards are in there. And they come through in these subtle ways. Sometimes like the title of the card is actually in something. Like I have a poem that was called The Faith of a Fool, and another one that I wrote called The Empress. And sometimes they are referenced in some of the writing and, referenced in various capacities, depending on where I was at in life. And sometimes I can just look at something and see, oh, that was the phase where I was learning how to be like the high priestess, or I was really going through that phase where I was learning about, whatever it is, justice. So our inner strength, that's a card as well. So they are interwoven throughout all of that, and they are a way to help us organize our experience of self. And if we don't have a way to understand ourselves, to organize ourselves, to think about ourselves, like our understanding of ourselves is as rich and varied as the constructs that we use to build our understanding of self on. So if we have limited ways that we think about ourselves, sometimes that gets in the way if we're going through expansion. And one of the reasons that we educate ourselves and we do things like listen to podcasts and read books and tap into others' wisdoms and their presentations of ideas and thoughts is because it helps enhance our understanding of those things. And when we are going through a shift or a phase in our life and we're able to put words to it or to see it reflected in something, we don't always understand the value of that until we haven't had it. And all of a sudden we do. I can't tell you how many times I have maybe done some client work and they've maybe shared something and I've reflected back, here's what I hear. And gosh, that sounds like this. And sometimes when we're going through, like, let's say they're going through grief, sometimes when we're going through grief, this is something that some people might experience and they might say, oh my gosh, like that's just it. That's exactly what I've been feeling. And nobody in my life gets it. They just haven't been through it themselves and they don't understand loss. And I've been so confused why I'm feeling this way. And that really helped me understand myself. That is valuable. When we see ourselves in a story, when we hear ourselves in a song, that's why certain songs resonate with us. Some of it's the musicality and what the music does and how it like stirs our soul. Sometimes it's the words. And if you've ever listened to like the same words over and over and be like, oh my gosh, I love this part, or use a song to process a breakup or a loss or just to be really happy. They put into language an experience that we might not always have the construct for. So when we do archetype work and tarot work, it helps give us like a deeper language to understanding our own journey. And I feel the better we understand ourselves and keep staying open to discovering and growing ourselves, the more that we are able to expand and we can show up in the world in a much more powerful way. So that was my little plug for why do archetypes even matter? That was just an off the cuff list of some things I wrote down of how they help us in our life. So let's dive into the Fool a little bit more today. I started to earlier, and I'm going to loop back to what I said. In many ways, we are all on the Fool's journey throughout our entire life. We are on this journey of moving through this experience as a human being, and we don't have an instruction manual. We actually don't really know what we're doing. We hope to figure it out along the way. We meet a strange cast of characters from many walks of life. We have many choices to make and many challenging lessons to learn, and a lot of wisdom that we are asked to integrate during that time. And whether or not we relate to the word fool, it's actually like, I think one of my very favorite cards in the deck outside of the Star and Temperance. I really like many of them, but I love getting the Fool because to me, when I see it, it always means I have that like fresh, vital optimism where I'm slinging my knapsack on my back and I'm like, let's have an adventure. Let's leap off this cliff. And instead of always being so concerned about where am I going to land, what's going to happen, I'm just going to take a leap. I think that the Fool energy is a little bit easier for many to embody when we are younger, because it suits that life stage a little bit more. When you think about this idea of like backpacking through Europe or having like fresh, youthful optimism, a lot of people might think about being on the cusp of young adulthood, where you are like 17, 18, 19, you still have like the whole world before you. The world is your oyster. and you are setting off on this grand adventure. It's not uncommon for a high school graduation for people to, at least in my high school graduation, a lot of people got a copy of the book, Dr. Seuss's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, and it's sort of like, today is your day. You're starting a new adventure. So get on your way. And it's like this whole rhymey children's book about, oh, the places you'll go in life and the great adventures that you'll have. That's the full energy. It is really beautiful, beautiful energy. And I think that in many ways, we don't have to be young to have that energy in our life. It can be just a little bit easier to relate to it, because as we go on this journey of humaning, oftentimes we start to collect experiences where we become a little less optimistic. We might feel a little bit more jaded or a little bit more cynical. Sometimes we lose our sense of optimism and hope. And the Fool is really here to remind us that no matter how much we know, how much our hope gets kind of chafed by hard experiences that we might have, that we can dip into that collective well at any time and re-energize that sense of finding sort of that sunny, optimistic fool inside of ourselves when life is calling us on a new adventure. The fool is Bilbo Baggins rushing out his front door when Gandalf ropes him into the hobbits in the original Hobbit book and ropes him in with the dwarves and ropes him in on this big adventure to go to the mountain and go find this dragon. And he has no idea what he's doing. That is the archetype of the fool in literature. I love that archetype. I relate to this archetype when I made the decision to move to Kauai and kind of close down life in Alaska and just leap off this cliff and not know where it was going to take me. And I've often said, if I knew now or knew then what I know now, I don't know that I would have done it. I would have said, it is too hard. You're going to have too many twists and turns. I vastly underestimated the amount of challenge and hardship that I would encounter. And some of that was a reflection of, just moving and starting over. Some of that is reflection of going from sort of this one extreme place, Alaska, to this other extreme place, polar opposite, Hawaii. Some of it is a reflection of trying to reinvent my career and grow myself, my writing, my speaking, and really grow my spiritual practices and my spiritual offerings. And some of that too is just a reflection, I think, of my life stage and challenges that I probably on a soul level said, I'm going to sign up to work with these particular challenges. And some of that is a reflection of our world and the fact that I came to this island in 2017 and our world has changed a lot since even that time. So many things through these challenges in the way. And if I had known then what I know now, I might have told myself, don't do it. This is going to be really hard on you. And yet I'm so glad I didn't know then what I know now, because I wouldn't have done it. And I would have made safer choices. And despite the fact that there's been a lot of challenges on my personal journey, there's also been so much beauty and so much joy and so much wisdom and so many life lessons that were hard earned, and that I don't think there was any way to experience them or to grow in that wisdom, to grow in that spiritual knowledge, to grow as a human without just going through them and having to learn about them as I experienced them. So I'm so glad that I took a leap and I didn't think about where will I land and what will it look like and didn't put a lot of planning into it. That is the wisdom of the fool. And I think that when we can tap into that energy, it can inspire us to say yes a little bit more. It can inspire us to ask ourselves the question, is it okay to throw caution to the wind a little bit more in this, especially if it lights my heart up? Can I just try something new here? Can I do something new? I think that it helps us engage with life as more of an adventure. If I look at the last few years from a different perspective of the archetype, like we'll go with like the emperor energy, which we'll get to when we get to the emperor. That's, I don't know, about 4 cards down the line. I would probably assess the last few years differently than I would from the perspective of the fool. The emperor would say, there was a lot of messes made and a lot that had to be cleaned up and restructured and reorganized, and new systems that needed to be put into place. Now, all of that is true. It was messy. I did a lot of reordering and restructuring of my own life, which intersected with the world reordering and restructuring itself. It's not a super fun interpretation, though, to look at it through emperor energy. The fool would say, what an adventure that was. Wow, I can't believe some of the things that happened. The fool would say that all experiences are worth having and that they are all worth just being part of our collection of experiences. The fool, in many ways, in the fool's naivete and optimism, is also one of the most intelligent cards in the deck, because the fool knows how to return to a beginner's mind and look at something with fresh eyes. The fool knows how to forget what we think we know, unbecome what we've already became, and learn to reinvent ourselves and become something new and approach something with fresh eyes and a joyful heart and some form of youthful optimism, regardless of where our biological age is and what life phase we're in. There's wisdom in that. There is wisdom in being able to hold and embody the energy of the fool and the wisdom of the beginner, and juxtapose that with also the wisdom of the elder who has been around the block and knows all these things and has all this collection of wisdom from all these experiences and has the answers to everything. There's wisdom in both. And so I think that when we are able to say, what a grand adventure this has been, sometimes I know it doesn't always feel very adventurous, but I do think that there is such beauty in that. And there's such inspiration in that. It was interesting. I was trying to think of illustrations from my own life to share today about times where maybe I have been the fool. Kauai is the obvious one. And I've certainly, it doesn't always have to be that big. We don't always use the energy for a massive life change. Sometimes that energy is just beginning something new, and saying yes to something that might make our life a little bit chaotic, but we're really intrigued by the possibility and we're willing to be a little bit of a novice or a beginner, or at least put ourselves in new circumstances and worry less about how we show up and looking like we have it all together and being the expert, and instead just stay open to our experience of the novel or experience of the new. And so sometimes we might do this in little ways, just through going to a new restaurant or doing an activity that we wouldn't usually do and trading self-consciousness for the adventure and the experience. But really what came to mind for a time that I was a fool, this is back in 2013. And I was in Oregon. And I had gone down there. I'd said yes to running a race with a friend of mine that I'd actually only met a few years before, briefly in a coffee shop in Oregon. I happened to be in Oregon because at the time, this is in 2010 now, I was going through a divorce and I was running quite a bit. And I decided to do ultrathon, I think is what they call them, a 40-mile race, as a way to, a rite of passage, if you will. And when I looked at places that ultrathons were going on, I found this 40-mile one in Oregon, and I randomly chose it because, one, at the time I lived in Alaska, and I thought, well, Oregon's not that far away. It feels more familiar than choosing a race that's like all the way across the country. And it also worked out in terms of like the date, time, and 40 miles felt like it was substantial enough that I could be like, it would be a real accomplishment. It was more than a marathon, which I'd done at that point, but I was not ready to commit to like 50 miles or beyond. I've not done anything more than 50. And I think I'm good with that. But 40 felt like a nice number. So I choose this race called Peterson Ridge Rumble. And I happened to be in Oregon. And I had spontaneously booked a hotel, Silver Cloud Hotel. And I happened to like walk down the block and go to a coffee shop my first day in Oregon. I run into this woman who's there and she's dressed in running clothes and she happens to be out with her running group. And they were finishing up a run and getting coffee. And we chatted for maybe 5 minutes. And I happened to say, like, oh, like I'm a runner too. I'm here to do the Peterson Ridge Rumble. And she was really intrigued by how I just decided to show up when I'm flying solo. And we ended up trading information. We became friends on Facebook. And over the course of the next couple of years, we never even talked on the phone, but she just really related to the kinds of things I posted. And every now and then might send me a message and be like, I wish we lived closer. I'd love to go for a run with you. You know, you just have like really good energy. And she invited me to do this race called the Silver Falls Marathon in like July of 2013 and said, you can come stay with me, come do this race with me. I tapped into my Fool energy and I said, why not? At the time I was single and I was really open to having new experiences. And so I decided to go down and do this race, which was in November of that year. And a week before the race happened, I had for me what was one of my first really big losses. I lost my dog named Peppy, who I'd had for a very long time. And he had just turned 15. And I always knew that like when he passed, that it would be really hard on me. And it was. Pet loss is a different kind of loss. And for those of us who've really loved an animal companion and really related to them as being our family or our friend or soulmate in some form, we know that kind of loss leaves a hole in the heart in a different way than other losses might, but it's very significant and meaningful. And this little gremlin guy had seen me through, you know, the beginning of my career as a psychologist, through my first marriage, through the divorce of that, and through this becoming of self and the spiritual awakening and all these changes that life rendered in those years. And I call this the dynamic duo. And I knew the time had to be coming because 14-year-old dog going on 15, I could tell he was slowing down, but I'd always hoped for more time. So I was faced with saying goodbye sooner than I wanted. And I thought about canceling the race. Some voice in me said, just go. And I decided to go, even though I was really struggling. And, it had only been like 5 days at that point when I first flew down, I think 4 days, and now I'm on a plane, and I get down there, and to not dwell on this too long, I was already embodying that full energy at the time of just walking into something. I remember taking like a shuttle to this woman's house. We never even talked on the phone. We made all these plans. I didn't feel afraid. Like she posted enough that I was like, this is a mom. She's a runner. I think we're going to get along great. I was at a life phase where I had a pretty good sense of like who I was going to resonate with. And I just kind of felt like she was a kindred spirit, even though we hadn't develop the friendship fully at that point, and I show up at like 5:30 a.m. in the morning at her house in Oregon. Talk about full energy, just really taking this leap. And despite my grief, I had this really lovely few days with her prior to the race and getting to know her and just kind of running errands and doing normal stuff in her life and going for runs. And it gave me some space to be away from Alaska, to be away from my home space where I had all these memories of Peppy, of my dog. And during the race, that year, I was running a little bit faster than normal because I, really missed Peppy. And I was like, you did not spend your whole summer training. and working hard. And I had all these memories connected with him where maybe I would like go to climb a mountain for training. And since he was a little old gremlin man, he'd stay in the car with the windows cracked, especially on rainy days where it wouldn't be too hot. And I would be like, okay, guard the car. I'm going to be up and I'm going to go train and I'll be back. Or I would go out the door for a run and he'd give me like this sad-eyed look of, are you really leaving me? And I would be like, wait right here, I'll be back. And then we'd like go to the coffee shop and go get him a biscuit and me a mocha when I was done, like all these memories. And I was like, you did not spend your summer doing all of this to get here and to run slow because you feel sad. And so I used it to inspire me. And I had this spiritual sense that he was with me, like a Patronus from Harry Potter, spurring me along. Because I was running so fast, I ended up passing this guy at mile 7 who was going a little bit slower. That's a whole other story for another day. But long story short, we chatted a little bit and kind of ran close to the same speed. And he finished the race before me and stuck around and waited at the end to chat with me. And his mom was there that day at the race with him. I remember thinking, well, that's really sweet. This guy brought his mom. And he got my number after the race. And I had this thought in my head of like, I don't need some guy from Oregon having my number. And at the time I'd been burned in enough relationships in my single years that I was not interested in anything that wasn't real and that wasn't sincere. But there was really no good reason to say no. And he was really nice. And so I think we exchanged that information. And, another thing of serendipity happened where somehow we ended up texting afterwards, which is kind of a whole other story here. But the point is that we were connected over text at that point, and he invited me for a cup of coffee the next day. And I happened to be at a coffee shop at the time. My friend was busy all afternoon and she just dropped me off, and I was working on my art and working on my writing. And I had this moment. I almost said no. Let me tell you why. I really could feel the grief and the ache. And despite being in Oregon and being there for my dog and running really well and having this sense of I did it for me and Peppy and did it to sort of celebrate this relationship. And I was making all this meaning at that point out of his loss. I felt really tired. I felt really tired in heart. And I felt tired and kind of jaded from this accumulation of tough life experiences that had happened over the last few years since my divorce. I really struggled in relationships as I had to move into the dating world. And there was a lot of good lessons, a lot of lessons I don't think I could have learned any other way, but I wish I hadn't learned them. And I really just felt this heaviness and this tiredness of heart. Other things had happened, and I just felt like this accumulation of grief and loss. And I had this heaviness, and I thought, I just want to sit here in this coffee shop and drink my coffee and be in my little empath, highly sensitive person, artist world, and not talk to anybody. And I already showed up and did this brave thing and ran this race and used up my spirit of adventure. I don't want to have coffee with some guy and open myself up to something that's not going to be anything anyways, because he lives in Oregon. And I had this moment. I thought of the Fool, thought of that card in the deck. I thought of the deck that I'd used the most at the time then, Shadowscapes Tarot. And I thought, BethAnne, when did you become the kind of person that stopped saying yes to a cup of coffee with somebody that you connected with because you're afraid of what might happen? When did that become you? And I really had this reckoning in that moment. And I was like, I don't want to be that person. And so I said, yes. This is my husband we're talking about, if you haven't figured it out. So the story went on. Probably one of the best yeses, the best yes I ever said. Can you imagine if I'd said no? That cup of coffee led to the beginning of a really deep friendship and long distance, just getting to know each other, which eventually led to him coming to Alaska. And like I said, there's a longer story there, but I almost missed that opportunity because I didn't want to be the fool and I didn't want to take a leap of faith. I didn't want to say yes to a cup of coffee. that is what the Fool can offer us. Sometimes it comes into our life, and in this small voice, it says, be the kind of person who says yes to this. Be the kind of person who takes a leap and doesn't have to think about what might happen. This isn't even practical. Like, this makes no sense to do this. I'm so glad I said yes that day. And I still remember so vividly having that moment of being like, be the fool, take a leap. When did you become this jaded person who just wants to like cloister herself off and like hide in her grief? Like, say yes to this, like say yes to, this coffee date. I think the last thing that I wanted to bring to light today is that there are times where we say yes to something, we take a leap of faith, we decide to have the adventure, and it doesn't work out. And earlier, I mentioned that when we are working with any of the archetypes, they can be best understood within the context of all of them having a light side and a shadow side. I think a better way actually might be to say the light side is not only the positive characteristics, but maybe like integration is part of how we can understand like a more integrated side. And then the shadow side is the characteristics where we haven't integrated the wisdom of the archetype. We haven't integrated the wisdom of the Fool. And so we are having an unintegrated aspect of that, or unintegrated experience of that particular aspect, or we are really out of balance with it. Like if somebody was always rushing into something and they were never planning and they never thought about what might it look like on the other side, that's might not be a really balanced way to live. Maybe they would have lots of adventures, but other people might say, well, they're really irresponsible. Like you can't count on them for anything. If they get a better offer, a better call, like they always say yes to that. They don't make a good friend, or they don't do this, or they don't do that. None of those things are necessarily in and of themselves intended to be some judgment. Like we should have to be these, kind of completely balanced beings with no flaws. It's not what I'm talking about here. I just mean that when we are examining these different archetypes, it's helpful to look at like, what's the flip side of it? If somebody had an overabundance of this energy, maybe they would have other parts of them that were really underdeveloped. And I think part of when we think about the idea of being whole and being well and working on building bridges inside of ourselves and accepting all aspects of ourselves. Earlier I said the archetypes can help us when we need to bring a aspect of ourselves that we're not as familiar with out to the forefront. I think when we are thinking about those things, part of wholeness is knowing who we are, being our authentic self, and knowing that we can develop qualities within us that help balance out other qualities that we might have in an overabundance. So if we were somebody who by nature had a lot of this kind of energy of just always leaping before they looked, maybe like one of the challenges in self-development might be developing their own relationship with responsibility and structure and thinking things through. So when I talk about the integrated light aspects and the shadow aspects, this isn't meant to be like, these are the good qualities and these are the bad qualities. And you don't want the bad qualities, only the good qualities. That's way too one-dimensional of a perspective to look at this through. I'm really thinking about looking at this more holistically and realizing that for anything, if we have an overabundance of something, that sometimes we need to develop other aspects to balance it out, and that there can be challenges to anything that is a personality or a character trait. They're not good or bad. They're not right or wrong. There's just a matter of how do they serve us? How can they be helpful? And how might they challenge us? And how might those challenges be an invitation to grow and become a little bit more? So I think with the Fool, what if that cup of coffee hadn't worked out? It's funny to say, I mean, obviously this cup of coffee and this race and all of this led to my life going on this completely different trajectory. But let's pretend it wasn't something that worked out. What's the worst that can happen over a cup of coffee? Probably not a lot, since I was going back to Alaska. But there's other things in our life sometimes that we say yes to. And maybe we wind up in a heap of trouble or wind up in something and go back and say, oh my gosh, if I knew now what I knew then, like I wouldn't have said yes. And not just because it's hard, but because I, really landed myself in trouble over this. There's certainly things that when I think about when this energy was the most prominent in my life. And a lot of that is kind of where I was at when I really had gone through my spiritual awakening and I was striking out after my divorce and really opening up to new experiences. I had a lot of energy of just kind of being optimistic and brave and hopeful and just taking these leaps of faith. And the downside of all that is I was also really naive. I had a tendency to believe that if people looked good, they were good. I believed who people told me they were, which wasn't always who they really were. And I didn't always have some of the wisdom, especially relationship wisdom in the world of dating. I didn't always have some of that wisdom because I didn't have the experience. So the Fool can have a bit of naivete to it and sometimes regret the choices made because they just jumped in or rushed on into something without thinking about it. Now, I would challenge that and say that if we are adopting the perspective that all experiences ultimately are just part of why we're here to learn mistakes, then we can regret an experience. But, from a more spiritual perspective, I would say to anybody, well, even our regrets were still learning experiences. They were something that we learned from. There was growth. There was self-discovery. There was some kind of hidden light that we found in them. So nothing's really lost. It's just part of our unique soul path and the twists and turns that we take. And even naivete is really beautiful because sometimes when we're cynical and we think we know too much, maybe we don't say yes to something that would have ended up being really beautiful. So sometimes that innocence and that beginner's mind and that sunny optimism and idealism of, oh, I'll just be okay and work out. Sometimes that can be profoundly beautiful. And so when it doesn't work out, we can still appreciate that some part of us, had the ability to feel hope and had the ability to be idealistic. When life breaks our heart because something didn't work out, we don't beat ourselves up for throwing ourselves into it or throwing our whole hearts into it. We can celebrate ourselves and say, my gosh, I sure tried hard and I sure loved hard and I sure fell hard, and I really kind of banged myself up in this experience. But maybe we can flip it. And instead of beating ourselves up for being naive, we can just congratulate ourselves on having like a big, pure, open, innocent heart. So we can always work with those aspects. And I really think when we are talking about understanding shadow aspects of any archetype, any card, the shadow aspects of the Fool, it's not about here's what you want to look out for as a cautionary tale. It is about wisdom and discernment. Here's some things to be aware of. But I think ultimately that any shadow comes into our life so that we can heal it and we can build a bridge to that aspect of ourselves. So when I look back at, we'll say, mistakes made and choices that I made, during those formative years when I was newly single and going through these initial stages of just awakening and becoming back in the earlier 2000s, I can look at that and say, like, I forgive myself for not knowing what I didn't know then. And I'm grateful that I have the wisdom now. And I can appreciate how brave I was. I can appreciate how brave I was in deciding to come to this island and not having a huge life plan of here's what I'm going to do for work and here's how it's all going to look and here's like the 5-year plan. I might have wisdom now and say, well, if I were ever to do something like that again and make another big move and transplant, there's definitely things I would want in place now that I didn't have at the time. Because I've been through not having them. And I just am not interested in repeating that experience where everything is such a blank slate. But I can really appreciate the courage that it took to leap. I can look back on that cup of coffee and appreciate the courage that it took for both of us to show up for coffee that day and then to continue to pursue this long distance relationship. And as I said, it's a whole other story, with that relationship. But, we really leapt and we're like love or bust. And we're all in almost from the beginning, almost from that cup of coffee. I think when we realized there was really something there. And I can look back and say, oh my gosh, you brave, like happy young individuals with stars in your eyes. We were in our 30s and 40s at the time. So we were youngish, but not that young, but I think that's the thing about falling in love, right? It makes all of us, when we're in that experience in those initial stages, it brings up the fool in us that just wants to run in and open our hearts to the experience. And whether it's another person or we're falling in love with doing something for the first time, or we're really passionate about something that really lights our heart up, and we are opening up to this new loving experience, this new light experience with it. I hope all of us can find that part that just runs on in and takes a leap and doesn't have to know how it's going to look. And we're able to engage with that part of ourselves and that beautiful energy, because I think there's just so much wisdom to be found there. And healing that shadow stuff really isn't about don't do it. It's about learning from it, integrating lessons that we learn from our experiences, forgiving ourselves for what we didn't know, and learning to be compassionate and celebrate this beautiful aspect of ourself that no matter how old we get, I think always retains this beginner's mind, or at least the ability to find that and to dive into something without necessarily having to know the way. And that is profoundly beautiful. And it's what the full archetype is all about. So I am going to end today with a poem called Faith of a Fool. I named this episode after that. And this is from my poetry book, Cranberry Dusk. Faith of a fool. You can't see what's waiting on the other side if you won't let go, or find new ground when you've already drawn your lines in the sand. Just ask the sea, who understands much better than we, who never tries to stop the moon from changing its tides, or clings so fast to old waves they cannot form afresh. Life supports us if we let it, making a way out of hope and possibility. All it takes is the courage to believe and the faith of a fool who doesn't know better than to leap. All right. I am really excited for this series and exploring all of these archetypes. We are not doing another archetype next week. As I said, I'm going to be spacing them out. Next week, our topic is standing in your power. So we will be waiting for the next archetype, which will be the magician, for another week or two. But next week, we're going to talk about standing in your power and how do we really not only live our truth, but stand in our power and our right to live our truth. I didn't say it today, but the last thing that I wrote down in my notes to talk about, I wrote, it is your divine birthright to embrace the archetype of the fool. It is your soul right to have the experience of looking before you leap. I mixed that up. Leaping before you look, to have that idealism, that optimism, that hope. That is part of standing in your power. And there are many things that are our divine birthright. And we're going to talk about what are those things? How do we stand in our power? How do we own our experience of self? If we are making a break from what everybody else is doing or from life as we knew it, and we're standing in our own truth or doing something that feels authentic to us, how can we do that in a way where we are less apologetic about it and more about empowering ourselves and saying, I know this is right for me. And so this is what I'm choosing to follow. So we will be exploring concepts of power, living our truth, and not only how do we stand in it in a way where we don't apologize for it, in more of an external sense, but how do we work with ourselves internally when we are trying to stand in our truth and we're kind of afraid to do so? And we keep doubting or we keep questioning ourselves. So we will look at both our inner relationship with that and our outer relationship with that. So with that, thank you so much for joining me today. I will be back here next week with our next episode. And until then, be well, be love, be you, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.